Hello again, live stream. We have found our fanfiction. I remember this fiction as soon as it was brought up, and it is very, 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 very sad. Well, maybe not very, but it's very sad, at least. It's called To Be An Alicorn. It's part of Spark, but I read it as a standalone, even though it's a final chapter. But you'll get the gist of it. And I'm not going to read the description because it's about the entire story. And it's by A Very Strange. And that's his author name. So it's quite long, so this might be the last story for tonight. So I'm going to leave you crying in your pillows tonight. And then, yeah, we'll see what happens afterwards. To Be an Alicorn, part of Spark, by A Very Strange. Sweet Apple Acres was a busy place in spring. Two young stallions walked the fields with plows in tow, while a male pony dragged in shipments of seeds and tools, and a couple of more ponies were visible almost amongst the apple trees. Adding to the general bustle was a visitor to the farm who gingerly stepped out of the sky, looked around, and opened the gate to the main homestead area. A filly, not quite yet a mare, with a light green coat and a straw-colored hat, and basket strapped to her saddle, had been trotting through the area and noticed the visitor first. She stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes as big as the moon. Princess? Oh, hello, the visitor said. I'm here to see Applejack. Is she around? Great Granny Applejack? The filly asked. The visitor paused and nodded. The young pony kept her eyes on the visitor and pointed towards the barn. There, in a rocking chair, an ancient mare sat with a worn brown stelton covering her eyes. Her coat was grey, but with a healthy sheen, and her hair was so blonde it was nearly white. The visitor ignored the looks she got from the farm ponies and approached the old mare. Took you long enough, Applejack replied, her voice raspier than the visitor remembered it, but still strong. I came as soon as I got your letter. You always with your letter-writing type, Twilight. I figured that'd get your attention. The old mare moved her head aside and looked at the pony before her. Twilight had grown slender, if not that tall. Her purple coat shone as healthy as it had ever been, her eyes sparkled yet with youth, and her deep blue mane had grown long and flowing. She couldn't be far past a young adult from her looks, yet the old pony before her was her lifelong friend, and a testament to her true age. Applejack heaved herself off of the rocking chair. Twilight moved to help as she heard numerous pops and cracks from her friend, but Applejack shrugged her off. Ah, not you too, she complained. I'm fine, I tells you. She gave herself a shake, a few more sickening pops coming from it. Twilight just smiled at her stubborn friend. I see you're a great-grandmother now, she stated conversationally, almost chiding her friend. Applejack was stretching her back now. How many joints did this mare have to crack? Great-grandmother. Well, aunt, but it didn't have the same ring to it, do it? Applejack replied. She nodded over to Twilight's shoulder, making the alicorn turn. Off from the barn they were at was the Apple family homestead, where the filly had just greeted Twilight and had apparently entered and was now exiting. They had once the youngest of the youngest. Of the youngest? Twilight asked with a laugh. Applejack sucked in air through her teeth. One was missing, creating a sharp whistle. Of the second youngest, if I remember right, she replied. A few more pops came from her, and she seemed to be finally done. The filly had apparently gotten her mother a mare with a bright red coat and a brown mane. Images of Big Mac from long ago flashed through Twilight's mind. Princess Twilight! Twilight cringed as she was greeted by the new mayor. It's an honor, it is. Would you care to stay for lunch? We have any delicacy you could ask for. Any apple-based ones, that is. She smiled nervously. Applejack snorted. Sure. Get out the fine silk pillows we keep too, and line up the gold silverware while you're at it. The mayor gave a worried glance to Applejack before turning back to Twilight, bowing slightly. Applejack hated the bowing. Please excuse Granny Applejack. She's a close personal friend of mine, Twilight said, trying to sound soothing. That I'm just going to spend some time with today, if that's all right. Ah, yes, of course. The mayor leaned over and forced her filly head down, making her bow too. Twilight sighed. Get on with yourself, Candy Apple, Applejack told her, and let Appletini do her chores, will you? She began to walk away with a shake of her head. Twilight gave the two earth ponies a small smile before following a glance over her shoulder one last time at the mayor and her daughter. You Apple family ever gonna run out of names? She asked. Eventually, Applejack replied. Her gait was as solid as all those years ago. Twilight noticed with surprise. I tell you, I thought I'd be glad to see the Apple family back up to full strength, he said, referring to the family's legacy all around her. But it's just more ponies telling me when to go to bed, which foods I'm not supposed to eat because of my kidneys, or, she ended with a huff. And I can still Appleback better than y'all, and y'all know it, she yelled to no one. Twilight smiled at her friend. It's good to talk to you again, Applejack, she replied. It's been too long, but your letter made it sound urgent. It is urgent, Applejack replied. It is urgent to spend the day out of that free castle and back here in Ponyville. Or did you finally forget all of us little ponies? Twilight cringed and hung her head. She was surprised by a punch on the shoulder. Something about the same spot made her yelp, her wings flying out on their own volition. Sorry, new word. Applejack laughed as Twilight folded them. Ha! That trick always worked on Rainbow, Applejack responded, grinning at her. I wondered if it was a Pegasus thing or what. That was mean. Tell you what, you can buy me lunch and we'll call it even, Applejack responded, head held high. Twilight rolled her eyes at her friend's logic and followed her down the road. The weather was beautiful today, and she soaked in the quiet of outer Ponyville. Applejack seemed to watch over her, and eventually spoke. So how's things with the cute little mare you were seeing, or what's her name? You mean Luna? Twilight asked. Applejack faked surprise, slapping her forehead with a hoof, and nearly sending her hat flying. Oh, that's it, she replied. Twilight laughed. The elements of honesty is a horrible liar, she teased. And great, thanks. And great, thanks. I don't even think I could find such a joy in the mechanics of government, but she seems excited by every little bylaw that comes up to her, and it's constantly looking to improve the system. Not that the bureaucrats like that much, of course. I meant more about how the two you are doing. Oh, Twilight gave an apologetic look. Great, you remember the wedding. I remember you blushing so hard we thought your coat had turned red. Applejack smiled and looked to the sky. You know, you've helped a lot of folk out by doing that. By getting married? Twilight asked. Applejack nodded. Yup. Hard to argue against when you got a pair of filly foolers on the throne. Applejack! Twilight hissed, cringing at the term. Sorry. Old dog knew tricks. And how about Celestia? She don't mind her sister running most of the things nowadays? Not at all, Twilight told her, swelling with joy and pride. It was always hard for her to balance her work as the ruler of Equestria and the headmistress of her school. That's what she really loves. She spends so much more time with her students now. I'm almost jealous. Applejack guffawed. What? I think you might have one up them there, Sugar Cube. Twilight smiled and lowered her head a little, her pride deflating. Yeah, I said almost. But I'm sure I'm surprised you didn't go into the school with her. It seemed right up your tree. Twilight shook her head. Maybe it'd be fun to teach some classes one day. Imagine me with my faithful student. She grinned at the little joke. But for now, there's still so much out there to explore, so much more to learn than what's in the books. Right. You do that archy study? Applejack taxed her mind. Archaeology, Twilight corrected gently. And yes, ponykind spread rapidly after the end of the golems, and there are still ruins of the places settled by ponies who knew Luna and Celestia firsthand, or only a few generations later. It's amazing that the nightmare was thorough enough to convince every ponykind to bite into her story, but that doesn't mean all traces of the old tales are lost. Excuse my stumbling, it's 4 a.m. But where's the fun if you can't just teleport around? That ain't exploring. I can't go places I've never seen, or at least been given a very good description of, and a lot of ruins have strange magics about them that need to be preserved. My legs get more overworked than my magic. By now they had already made it to Ponyville proper, and Twilight stopped to look around. She smiled at first, spotting several landmarks from the town hall to Sugar Cube Corner, but slowly her smile faded, replaced by confusion and then sadness. I don't recognize any pony, she said quietly. Applejack turned to face her and gave her a gentle nudge. That kinda happens when you've been for 4 decades, she replied. Twilight gave a slight nod. Her eyes didn't seem to be sparkling anymore. Twilight nudged her again, this time as she began walking. Come on, we've got lots of places to see, she told Twilight. The alicorn gave a reluctant nod and followed her old friend through the streets. She garnered numerous looks, both of awe and trepidation. Why was the princess here? What was going on? Too much time had passed, she realized. None of them remembered the nerdy unicorn who barely kept the town library running and herself intact with the antics as she seemed to get herself into. Twilight turned her gaze ahead, trying to ignore the growing self-loathing inside of her. That was when her eyes caught something. That's new, she said to the building in front of her. Our barber shop. But Twilight saw it in her mind. The trees had been smaller, earth and sky, even the trees had changed. There had been even more bushes, but the path was the same. This was where the Carousel Boutique was supposed to be. This was an entirely different building, and it wasn't supposed to be. This isn't right. Where is it? She asked, looking around. She had been wrong. Maybe it was next door. What had they done to it? Applejack sighed. Sugar Cube. She stopped as Twilight rushed past her. Without thinking, the purple alicorn walked into the shop, practically bursting through the door. Her entrance was met with stunned stares and dropped jaws. Patrons sat covered in aprons, mostly staring at the mirrors until she had burst in. A few unicorns stood behind them, scissors and brushes hanging mid-air. The tools clattered to the ground, the spell keeping them aloft broken as the unicorns startled. Twilight winced as the clattering blades luckily hit only the floor. She looked around. Tinny music played through the speakers in the ceiling. The walls were tan, but there were shelves behind her with shampoos, conditioners, and lotions. The entire place was rectangular, with only a few square windows. It was a completely different building. Twilight finally noticed the eyes on her. Wrong building, she said, feeling more out of place than her first day in Ponyville. My mistake, she backed out, trying to smile at the stunned ponies. She only turned around once outside and found Applejack staring at her. Her friend had so many lines on her face, under her eyes. How could she not have noticed that before? You're an idiot, Applejack told her. Twilight hung her head. I know. Find what you were looking for? No, Twilight told her with a shake of her head, glancing at the building. Where did it go? We already paid rent on the darn place every month, every year, Twilight replied. She was always meant to move back, I reckon, someday. Next year, it was going to be next year. Well, 1 year. Next year didn't come, you know that. She never did have any faults, and Sweetie, bless her heart, had her own problems to worry about. So the township got her place, and no one wanted it, and... Twilight nodded, wiping her eyes. I just thought... I don't know what I thought. Come on, Applejack told her with a flick of her head. There's more. With that, Twilight began to understand why her friend had brought her here. She followed Applejack down the road. Now, even we're lucky, we can head down to the Sugar Cube corner, and she was cut off as she passed by an alleyway that was promptly tackled by a pink and blue blur. Twilight jumped back in fright, and just when the dust cleared, she saw what happened, or rather, who had brought her friend down flat. 2 sets of young eyes looked up at her. Ah, it's a princess! A blue Pegasus colt shouted. He looked beneath him and the pony he was laying on. Ah, it's Granny Applejack! He lapped off, fluttering a few feet in the air. With a sigh, Applejack lifted herself off the ground. Twilight's gaze was transfixed on the pink pony still on Applejack's back. Hello! The tiny filly said, staring at her with a smile on her face and in her eyes. Twilight found she couldn't work her mouth. Pinkella Daphne Pie! Applejack shouted. Oh. Pinkella Daphne Pie! Applejack shouted, looking over her shoulder. What are you and Rush up to? Get off my back! The pink filly with curly pink hair slid off of Applejack's back with a giggle that was somehow pink. Nothing, she said in a tone that children everywhere used. Twilight was still stunned. She even sounded the same. No, but besides being younger, this filly had already had her cutie mark, an open present with streamers flying out the top, but it wasn't her. But nothing but my hoof. Applejack looked at the colt. Rush, what do you have to say for yourself? The colt looked around, scratching his head. His mane, oddly, was snow white. I can only get in trouble if I'm caught, right? Bye! With that, he was off, leaving a gust of wind in his wake. That Pegasus could move. Rush! Rush, wait up! Pinkella Daphne Pie began after her friend, hopping along in a way all too familiar to Twilight. Applejack turned to her, shaking her head at the vanishing little ponies. Well, he said, stopping to cough, you just met the heir to the Pinkie Pie fortune, along with the worst rascal this town has ever seen since Applejack just stamped her hoof. Twilight's brows furrowed. But I know what you're thinking, Applejack replied. Scoodler's kin. Well, down the road a little, but I doubt you'd know. Anyways, no relation too. She shook her head. Twilight nodded. And Pinkella, I know. Hey, every generation needs its Pinkie Pie. Some things are just universal truths, she nodded, as she nodded her head decisively, and I would know. You said Pinkie Pie's fortune? Yup. You go digging all around Equestria and you'll still need to know, and you still need to get out more, Applejack scolded her. Sugar Cube Corner. They got spots all over here from here to Philadelphia. They even got one in Cloudsdale. Wow, I knew Pinkie Pie was doing well back in the day, but it grew more in her daughter's hoofs, Applejack explained. But she followed Pinkie Pie's dream for it, wanting to make more so it was a place for any pony to throw any kind of party, any time. Now, we don't need to stop by the Sugar Cube Corner anymore, thanks to that, but you're welcome, but you're still buying me lunch. You mean you just wanted to show me lunch? Twilight smiled weakly and nodded, so Applejack brought her over to the Daffodil Delicatessen. Never read that word. It was moderately busy, with a respectable establishment specializing in good sandwiches and great service. As soon as the two of them entered the restaurant, a waiter noticed them and just dropped his plate on a table, not even looking whoever he dumped it on. He was at a podium before they were, nodding deeply since he couldn't bow. Madam and Princess Twilight, we are honored, truly honored. What brings you to our humble establishment today? There's 3 H's. Twilight had to admit she had never heard anyone roll an H before. Lunch, she replied simply. The waiter gave a nervous smile. Of course, of course. Where would you like to sit today? How may we serve you? Where do you have that's available? Why, every seat's available, my dear princess. The waiter seemed to be still trying to figure out how to bow without hitting his head on the podium. Twilight stifled a laugh. I don't know. Somewhere outside would be nice. And also some place that doesn't have any pony sitting at it already. She felt she had to add the last part. The waiter's head was bobbing so hard it might come off. He led them straight out the side to a patio. Twilight saw the waiter signal another staff member. She also heard Applejack snicker. Well, ain't you high and mighty? Her friend quipped in a not so quiet whisper. This is why I don't get out much, Twilight whispered back. By the time they get to their table, Twilight found a purple cushion at her place. She swore it was like every pony kept one hoof just in case. She didn't want to, but knew it would cause only more of a headache if she didn't take it. They'd think they'd offended or something. Another waiter came up with 2 menus as it first departed. Twilight held hers in place magically and could see the waiter was still waiting on them. Could you please give us a few minutes? She asked, making him jump. Well, why yes, of course. We're at your service. He backed away attentively. Once they were gone, Twilight just plunked her head onto the table. You okay, Sugar Cube? Applejack asked casually from her menu, as if nothing was wrong. I hate this whole princess thing. How did Celestia ever put up with me? I get it now. Well, it kinda happens when you're married into royalty, you know, Applejack replied. Besides, they're just being polite. They're afraid, Applejack. They fear me. Me, he sighed. Celestia and Luna have it worse because of the whole nightmare thing. But I don't get why they fear me. I've never done anything. Nah, Twilight said tiredly, actually rolling her eyes. It's not like you've got any power, like you could shut down this here place if you so as much as you felt like it, or just tear it up and throw it from here to Canterlot. But I don't do things like that. But you could. Twilight groaned and looked around. Ponyville was still Ponyville, even if the faces had changed. For the first time in years, Twilight felt desperately homesick for a place that had never been really hers. It began to all unwind for her. I miss everything. I miss the boutique. I miss Pinkie Pie's parties. I miss the Everfree Forest. I miss Sakura. I miss when Trixie came to town, or when I helped you with the Applebuck season, or... Slow down, Sugar, Applejack said, her voice low and sweet, grandmotherly. I miss them too. And I've missed you too. So let's just enjoy ourselves, okay? Twilight nodded and straightened herself. She saw the waiter approach again. He had probably timed 2 minutes to the second, and glanced quickly at her menu. The toasted carrot sandwich with a whole oat bread sounds wonderful, she told the waiter. I'm not very hungry. The waiter nodded, still looking worried. I'll just have to have fries, Applejack said. Twilight wondered waiter had even noticed her until she spoke. He was off in a flash, yet another came up right away, only to pour them a tall glass of crystal clear water. Well, at least they've got both of them something to drink. I can't stomach much these days, Applejack told her. The Candy Apple tries to keep the cinnamon apple pies and the turnovers away from me. I know she means well by it, but I'm a bit sick of it. Twilight nodded. I never really got to know your family. I'm sorry. Well, Applejack sighed. Of course, they're Big Mac's first kids, but since he didn't stick around, I just wound up being Granny Applejack. If Granny Smith just could see me now. She shook her head, her smile deepening and the lines on her face. Candy Apple sweet as you can guess. But she's going to worry herself dead before I hit the ground. Please don't talk like that. Please, Twilight responded. Applejack gave her a look, but before she could say any more, the food came. That was fast, Twilight thought to herself. She bit into the sandwich, which honestly was pretty good, while Applejack picked her hay fries. Every time Twilight took a sip of her water, she found it topped off. She had to try not to roll her eyes. Applejack kept silent during lunch, and Twilight found herself at a loss for conversation. Had they really grown that far apart? I'm finished with these. How about you, Twi? Applejack asked the alicorn, finishing her meal. Twilight was briefly heartened to see her old mare friend, her old moniker again, but then her mood fell when she saw Applejack had barely eaten. I know that look. You're like Candy Apple, you are. Don't worry. It ain't gonna make a difference. Her words were unusually cryptic for the salt of the earth pony, but Twilight just nodded. She turned to one of the nearly ever-present waiters. Check, please. Compliments of the establishment, milady. Twilight frowned. I'd really just rather... Twi? Applejack interrupted. She looked over. Her friend was so tired. She looked like she barely had the energy to shake her head. Let it go. Twilight turned back to the waiter. It's a lovely gift. Thank you. And your establishment is more than praiseworthy. You honor us, princess. Twilight cringed at the words and the bow that followed. Always the bowing. She briefly wondered talking to Luna into it, making it bowing illegal. No. Down that path lay the mind of a tyrant, and every well-meaning one who just wanted to enjoy their lunch with her friend. You come, Twilight. Applejack had gotten ahead of her, walked to the patio and into the road. Twilight nodded and caught up. Her friend's gait was slower than this morning. You know what today is, don't you? Applejack asked. Twilight was puzzled. Aside from the letter, nothing had marked it say as important to her. She just gave Applejack a confused glance. The earth pony sighed. Really, has it been too long, ain't it? It's my birthday, you darn fool! She sounded disappointed. The news hit Twilight like a stone. That was it. That was just too much. She found tears on her cheeks, and it didn't bother to wipe them away. Hush now, don't be like that. Applejack was at her side, pressed close as she could against the alicorn, brushing her folded wings. I know you didn't mean it. I almost stopped counting myself. You're 80 years old, Applejack said quietly, her voice unsteady. I know ponies that ain't lived half that. We all held on here, but I've been wanting to ask you, Twilight. Why me? The others stuck around, but this just ain't right. Twilight didn't even realize Applejack was leading her out of town. She shook her head. It was natural, kind of. It was no spell It's no spell if that's what you're asking. You're as solid as an apple tree, AJ. Mix that with your strong will and a good life, you'd be surprised. Plus, I may give more of a slightly magical aura that some ponies might be slightly receptive to. Slightly? Slightly. It's mostly a will thing. Applejack nodded. Makes sense. That's why it took Fluttershy a while, weren't it? good life and all. Yes, normally Pegasus ponies don't live that long, but Twilight added, she had such a gentle soul, and the years didn't wear on her as much as the other ponies. But she still weren't strong enough either, was she? Applejack asked. Only ponies truly die of heartbreak when her little grandfilly, she wiped her eye. I should have been there. Twilight was so angry at herself. I shouldn't have left Ponyville. I shouldn't have left any of you. She stamped on the ground, only wishing to kick herself. Applejack sighed and hushed her again. Enough of that, she told Twilight, once again coming off as so much older than her friend. The princesses need you, and it wouldn't be right for us to keep you here. Besides, there was nothing you could have done for her, lest you think you can make a rock-slide climb back up a mountain. Should, you probably can, but you know what I mean. Twilight hung her head. See, I could have done something. You can't go thinking around like that. You're putting the weight of the world on your shoulders. Besides, it all works out in the end, one way or the other. She looked up. Twilight realized where she'd been brought. Fluttershy's hut was gone, and in its place, Dragonfly Memorial Hospital and Veterinary Clinic. She read the red words emblazoned on a monolithic white building ahead of them. It wasn't pretty, but it was very stately. More windows than building, letting in all the sunlight it could. And it was surrounded by the most beautiful gardens Twilight had ever seen outside of Canterlot, with at least as much care put into them. Twilight could see every type of songbird that could possibly live here, fluttering through the tears. A rabbit stand just off the cliff, just off the path leading to the hospital, and the entire thing was surrounded in flowers made brilliant by the spring. This time, the tears rolled down her cheeks. She at least lifted a hoof to wipe them away. I remember this. Celestia went to the grand opening. I couldn't come. I couldn't bring myself to come. It was all y'all that made it possible. Fluttershy never was one to have a sum of money in the bank, or under the mattress, or anywhere else, really. Applejack shook her head. But the family does well know, you know. Her grandson, Fluttershy III, is a really good doctor. Oh, well, wait, her grandson Fluttershy? Yeah, well, apparently his parents wanted to keep it the tradition. He's a fine stallion. You know him well? Applejack sighed. We've met a few times recently. Come on, we're almost done. She turned off the road into the trees. Twilight was confused. Applejack, where are we going? It's a shortcut, Applejack told her. Are you sure you shouldn't be? How come Spike didn't make it? Applejack interrupted, shifting the conversation. Twilight frowned back at the back of her friend's head, but allowed a new topic. I'm sorry, he took a nap last year. Still going? Dragons can sleep up for 100 years, you know. Dragons can sleep up for 100 years, you know, Twilight told Applejack. The Earth Pony nodded. Twilight, she asked, her voice suddenly strained. Yeah? You're going to be there when he wakes up, ain't you? Yeah, yes. How long do dragons? About 2,000 years. There's a lot of variation, and records are spotty. Twilight briefly closed her eyes, but had to watch where they were going. Applejack was forcing herself up a hill, heaving her body every step of the way. I'll be there whenever that is, she told Applejack, anticipating her friend's question. Eventually, he will, and that will be the last person besides the princesses who actually knew me. You talk like it's already happened, Applejack said with a huff, and you're forgetting yourself, you idiot. What? How old are you? Little younger than me, right? And you know the princesses, I reckon. You know at least one of them inside, don't you? Inside and out, don't you? She briefly turned a grin to Twilight, who, after all these years, still blushed a little. And you know there'll be others. You know there will. Sooner or later, some bright-eyed filly's gonna come up to you, all full of ideas and problematic magic, and you'll be able to know her. She won't give you a choice. With a heavy breath, Applejack crested the hill. Twilight did so as well a moment later, and paused. This hill rose higher than all the land around it. She could see Sweet Apple Acres, the hospital, and even into Ponyville. Applejack stood in front of a single gravestone. You remember the funeral, don't you? Applejack asked, tears collecting in the lines on her face. Last time we could say we were all together. Yes, I could never forget. It was raining that day. I don't think it was scheduled, but it did. I remembered Fluttershy the most. She was always going on a bit daft by then, wasn't she? Asked for Angel the whole day. Applejack wiped a hoof across her cheek. Didn't say a word as they brought in the casket. I remember the colt who made a bad joke to Pinkie Pie after the service, Twilight said, sitting down beside Applejack. About one occasion that even she couldn't party for. After the stare she gave him, I wouldn't be surprised if he swallowed his own tongue. I think he almost did, Applejack said, sitting down. She was smiling, but still crying. Rarity ruined her dress in the rain. Just wouldn't leave, Twilight said. I remember the stallion she was with. He seemed nice. Guess it never worked out. Nah, spinster to the end. Applejack was shaking. 35 years. That's how long it's been since then, Twi. You realize that? We've been kept apart for that long. I can still see her face too, bright as ever. I didn't want to tell you, but it's hard. Nowadays, thinking back but I can't forget her smile. Twilight leaned in to try and support her sobbing friend, who was also to draw support from her. Come on, it was nice to visit, but we should get you home. Applejack closed her eyes and shook her head. I ain't going home, Twi. What do you mean? Twilight felt her throat begin to close up in panic. You know what I mean, Applejack said. She opened her eyes to look up at the gravestone. No, you can't be sure. I am. Soul thicker. They say with some pills and a lot of bed rest, I got a couple of years left, but that doesn't sound too bad, Twilight tried. They mean lots of bed rest, as in all the time. That ain't life, Twi, not for me. Applejack was shaking. I've raised colts and fillies from babes, and then watched them grow old and die. I haven't seen my friends in at least 15 years. Stop it, Twilight sobbed. You're not. Twilight smiled back at her. Hush now, not that. She managed to reach up and wipe a tear from Twilight's face. What did you say? It was friendship that gave those golems something to live for, weren't it? Sure, I've got my kin, but I'm a burden to them. I'm past my time, and I'm so tired. She looked Twilight in the eyes. Go. They'll know they'll find me here, and I don't want you to see me like this. No! Twilight let the tears stream down her face as sobs wrecked her body. I've missed everything else, every one of them. I haven't forgotten, I promise I haven't. I'm going to be here for you. I have to be, please. Fine then, Applejack said. I ain't got it in me to argue no more. The two of them stayed there, leaning on each other. Slowly, Applejack got down, laying on the grass. Twilight kept aside her, and Applejack snuggled against her, just like Twilight used to against Celestia as a filly. When the sun was setting, they were still there, Applejack let out a sigh, and her eyes hadn't opened for an hour. Twi? Where is she? Will I get to see her? Will I get to see all of them? It's hard to tell you where they. It's hard to tell you where, but yes, it's like the heavens, but better. There's earth and sky and trees and creatures and apples, and all the apples you can buck. And I know she's waiting for you. And they're all waiting for you, Twilight told her. Twi? Yes? We'll all wait for you too. But if you don't come with plenty of stories, if you don't come with a lifelong behind you, I'll whoop you. I will, Applejack, Twilight told her. I promise. Applejack sighed. She grew still. Twilight waited, but nothing stirred in the old mare. Twilight was weeping again, she realized, but she couldn't feel it. She only felt cold. Long after the moon had risen, and the last breath had passed from her friend's body, Twilight stayed there as if to keep her warm. She stayed there and looked at the tombstone, the night sky, and the world around her she had left behind. It was the inscription on the tombstone that kept drawing her eye. Here lies Rainbow Dash, legend of the Wonderbolts, founder of the Royal Equestrian Aeronautics League, and in her own words, most importantly, the most loyal friend she could be. Well, that was sad. Manly tears were shed, quite a lot. Delirious is indeed the word. That was sad. Many manly tears were shed. It wasn't the story I was looking for, but I enjoyed reading it nonetheless. Applejack voice is a pain in the flank. I think that was the last story for tonight. I've been at it for 12 hours. That should be plenty. So, yeah, I'm just gonna call it quits for today. I'll still be in the Skype call for quite some time, and I will see you guys at least next week when we will do hopefully an even better session and some feature stories. Keep suggesting stories throughout the week. I will add them to the list, and I bid you farewell.